spy on a campaign. This has always been a verdict in search of a crime, an impeachment birthed out of a resistance movement. It's time to end this charade and get back to doing the work we were elected to do.
Madam Speaker, I continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Fulcher.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In a day heavy in verbal debate, I choose to use my time to enumerate in detail every high crime and misdemeanor committed by the President of the United States. I will do so now.
Gentleman's time's expired.
Yield back.
Gentleman from California. Gentleman reserve.
Madam Speaker, I continue to reserve.
Thank
Gentleman
you.
from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Fleshman.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, in my 30 seconds, my heart aches for our great republic today. I implore my Democratic colleagues in this House, we're not Republicans or Democrats, we are Americans. This is not the right place. This is not the right procedure. Settle our political differences politically. We owe the American people a great duty to come together. Don't give the Senate the victory lap. Give the House the victory lap. Vote no to impeach. We owe it to the American people. They want so dearly for us to come together for our great republic and thank our great president. Thank you. I yield back.
And members are reminded to address their remarks to the chair. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. While we get to catch our breath, could you give us the time for both the majority and the minority?
It has 43 minutes. Gentleman from California has 29 minutes. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate that. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Waltz.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I'm a Green Beret and a proud veteran, but this process does not make me proud. I've fought all over the world, from Africa to Afghanistan, and seen fairer and more transparent processes than this. Since the Democrats lost the election in 2016, they've been focused on impeaching this president. Meanwhile, we have not solved the problems America entrusted us to solve: immigration, healthcare, infrastructure. Nothing in President Trump's call rises to the level of high crimes and misdemeanors worthy of impeachment. For that reason, I'll be voting against impeachment
Gentleman from
today.
California continues to reserve.
Yes, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Guthrie.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in opposition to the articles of impeachment on President Trump. My Democratic colleagues have been planning to impeach President Trump since he took office. After months of wasting House time on partisan investigations, they've been unable to produce evidence that President Trump committed a crime. I will vote no on today's articles of impeachment. I look forward to getting back to the business on behalf of Kentuckians. I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Maloney, for 2 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, the facts and the evidence establish beyond peradventure that the president abused the power of his office for personal gain and sought to cover up his misconduct by obstructing the Congress. What we do today goes to the heart of the oath we take to support and defend the Constitution. These actions are as necessary as they are heartbreaking. It is the president, not any member of this House, who has brought us to this sad place. His actions echo in this chamber, and like a tin can tied to his leg, will rattle behind him through the pages of history. For in the final analysis, none of us will escape the truth. It will come for us all in this world or the next. What is the truth? The president used taxpayer money and official acts to pressure a foreign government to help him win re-election by slandering a fellow American. How do we know this truth? We know because brave Americans, soldiers, and public servants came forward to reveal the president's misconduct. And the president, he continues to undertake an unprecedented cover-up to stonewall the public and obstruct their representatives in Congress. He withholds access to documents and records belonging to the public that would further establish his mendacity. He blocks his advisors and associates from testifying before the public to conceal the wrongs they witnessed. His actions are unworthy of the presidency. Today is about right and wrong and whether we still know the difference. Today we hold the president accountable. If we failed to do so, future presidents would see corruption as without consequence. And there, our democracy goes to die. We inherit this republic from our ancestors and we borrow it from our children. With humility, we pray that the history of this day will guide us to a better future for our nation. I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Long.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And we have never, ever in the history of this country seen a presidency like this one. Once the president was sworn in, 19 minutes later, the Washington Post said impeachment begins today. 1 million women marched the next day on Washington. Bank of America, Starbucks, both that supported Hillary Clinton, had their windows broken out here in Washington because people were so upset that this man was elected president of the United States. He's had his head held underwater for almost 3 years now, never coming up for a breath of air. Just keep pushing him down. Lowest black unemployment ever, lowest Hispanic unemployment ever, highest stock market ever,
Gentleman's time's expired.
Lowest unemployment in years, and
Gentleman from
Reserve the
California.
balance of my time.
I yield back.
Reserves?
Yes.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Fortenberry.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have been concerned since the beginning of this impeachment process that it has been driven by a predetermined guilty verdict. It's unfair, it's wrong, and now every future president, Democrat or Republican, will have to worry that the impeachment process will be driven as a blunt force political instrument. It's been said that this day is sad. It's not sad, it's regrettable, but this day will end shortly. The House has had its cathartic moment. Tomorrow will begin a new day. Let's get back to work. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, we continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from California, Mr. LaMalfa.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Ready, fire, aim. What we're hearing today are made-up articles to fit an ever-shrinking impeachment foothold. George Washington could be impeached under this criteria. Democrats believe they are saving our democracy with these hysterical made-up charges, which is odd because we're a republic, not a democracy, as they keep insisting. No one came to Congress to impeach, we hear. Several new and returning members have come specifically to impeach President Trump. I hear a lot today about sadness and solemnity. From impeachment? No, because their candidate lost in 2016. The American people chose Donald J. Trump to lead us into prosperity, not a socialist government. We will survive this day, but I call upon the American people to see through this sham and live to hear speaking
Madam Speaker, we reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Adderholt.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Johnson from South Dakota, I yield 30 seconds.
Mr. Johnson's recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I'm voting no. Impeachment is not in the best interest of this country, and in fact, it has only deepened the partisan divide that truly plagues this country. When the sun comes up tomorrow, I pray with all my heart that the anger and the division in this chamber will give way to an honorableness and a productivity and a time of working together. I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As this air traffic controller is getting in line for a landing, let's go back to Mr. Adderholt. 30 seconds from the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Adderholt.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Today, a duly elected president is being impeached by the House of Representatives by the Democrats, compelled by partisanship and not by the facts. I'm proud to stand here with President Donald Trump, and I plan to cast my vote against both articles of impeachment. This is not, it's not that the president abuses power. It is my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who are abusing one of the most powerful tools that's been entrusted to the Congress in the Constitution by our founding fathers. Twisting the Constitution to impeach a president
Time's expired.
you fear will be.
California.
Madam Speaker, we continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Madam Speaker, this time I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Olson.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, Webster's dictionary defines the Star Chamber as, quote, characterized by secrecy and often being irresponsibly arbitrary and oppressive. Sadly, my Democrat friends have turned this chamber, the People's Chamber, into the Star Chamber of the people. One great example. The most important duty we can do as members is declare war. Next one is to impeach a president. We're hoping Republicans to have every member stand up and vote, like for Speaker, say their vote loudly. That's been denied. CNN has been denied.
Madam Speaker, we reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Gentleman, thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you. Thank the ranking member. Thank you, Madam Speaker. And while this institution should rightfully ensure that the law is faithfully executed by the administrative branch, this exercise has shown itself to be the ultimate manipulation of the legislative branch's oversight powers in order to achieve political gain. I caution my colleagues who have placed political expediency ahead of moderation. Their votes later today will forever change this institution. Imagine a future where this body utilizes the most severe of its constitutional tools to continually put the oppositional party on trial. And with that, I yield back.
California.
Madam Speaker, it's my pleasure to yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Brown.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, when I was commissioned as Second Lieutenant in the United States Army, I swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution, and I've done so 13 times in my 35 years of public service. That oath means everything. To serve and fight for our country, to protect and promote our values. Yet President Trump betrayed his oath. He abused his power, the immense power of the presidency. He threatened our elections by inviting foreign interference. He chose investigating a political rival over defending our national security. So today, we must use our power, the extraordinary power endowed by our Constitution and entrusted by the people, the power to impeach. We must hold President Trump accountable, or else we will be complicit in undermining our democracy, our security, and our dignity. His conduct demonstrates his unfitness to serve as Commander-in-Chief and warrants removal from office. The oath I took as a member of Congress is the same I took as a soldier. An oath that reminds me values matter, duty, honor, and the rule of law matter. To keep my oath to the people I serve and the country I love, today I will vote to impeach the President of the United States. I yield back.
Madam Speaker, I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. LaHood.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I've said from the beginning of this process, impeachment is and should be the nuclear option, reserved for the most treasonous activity and the most serious activity. Clearly, that has been not met here. As I've reviewed the facts and evidence as a former federal prosecutor, I've read the transcripts, I've watched the hearings, I've read the whistleblower report. That has not been met here. In addition, this process has lacked fairness, due process, and transparency. We shouldn't be here tonight doing this. This is a travesty.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Harris.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, it's unbelievable. The few Americans that are going to be watching this, because they know what the outcome is. We all know what the outcome is. They're wondering why are we trying to negate the vote of 63 million Americans instead of talking about the things that Americans care about. Prescription drug coverage, the high cost of prescription drugs, the high cost of health care, securing our borders, keeping our economy going. These are the things we should be talking about. No, instead, we're going to pass this resolution tonight and then go home for Christmas vacation instead of doing the job of America. I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, we continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Watkins.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I was a political newcomer before this, and just like President Trump, perhaps like me, he was naive to think that this House, that in the people's house, everybody was true and just. It's not the case. Democrats weren't saddened by this solemn day. They weren't waiting for all the evidence. This was always about politics, because they loathe the president, because he didn't play by their Beltway rules. I should have known. But the fact is, Kansas is better, the U.S. is better, and the world is better because of Donald Trump.
Gentleman's time's expired. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, we continue to reserve.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from California, Mr. Calvert.
Gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My friends on the other side of the aisle have been clamoring for this day since President Trump was elected. The refusal to accept the election results and later the findings of the Mueller investigation have brought forth articles of impeachment that are negated by two simple facts. Namely, the military aid to Ukraine was provided and no investigation was ever started. The real offense is that the president won the election, and their fear is that he'll win again despite all their efforts. I will vote against the partisan attempt to overturn the election. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I continue to reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Burchett.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in opposition to impeachment against President Donald Trump. This is based on hearsay that were made by partisan witness behind closed doors. This impeachment is a sham, Madam Speaker, and has divided this country. Congress has wasted time on this impeachment, would have been better used on addressing issues that are facing Americans, like securing our southern border, the opioid epidemic, or establishing a constitutionally mandated budget. And now American workers have to wait until the Senate trial to pass the USMCA that the President and the House Republicans have been working on for over a year. I'm disappointed in the path Congress chose to go down, Madam Speaker. And for the record, Madam Speaker, I think you're doing a wonderful job.
Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gosar.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Ms. Speaker. It's obvious today that there's an intense hatred from the Democrats of President Donald Trump. Why do they hate the man so much? Maybe it's because of the out-of-control government gone wild, the abuses of FISA, the abuses by the FBI, the abuses in the State Department. Many of these, maybe it's just the previous administration they're trying to cover up. It's sad. This is a shameful act of what we're doing today. Shame on the Democrats. Shame on pursuing this. I ask everybody to vote no and to take notice of who votes for these articles of impeachment.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 30 seconds to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a sad day for America. We know this impeachment is a sham. They know this impeachment is a sham. They know we know this impeachment is a sham. And they know that most of the American people know that this impeachment is a shameful sham. We know that it began the moment the president was elected, long before he ever had a telephone call with any foreign leaders. We've heard the numerous quotations from them that validate those very points. And yet they persist in trying to overturn the duly elected president of the United States of America's election. When the president calls for
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I've heard several of my colleagues in a row now, and it's interesting to see how very few of them want to address any of the facts of the president's misconduct, nor do they wish to defend, nor do they wish, apparently, Madam Speaker, I've struck a nerve, nor do they wish to defend a president who would extort an ally, withhold military aid to help him cheat in an election. They don't want to defend that conduct. So instead they say, oh, Democrats really want to impeach the president, or Democrats don't like the president. But what they can't say is that this president's conduct was ethical. What they can't say was that this president's conduct was legal. What they can't say was this president's conduct was constitutional. What they can't say is this president has upheld his oath of office. No, they can't say that. All they can say is, we don't like the process, or our colleagues are just too happy to impeach, or it's It's overturning the will of the public when it's a Republican president. Interestingly, my colleagues who supported the impeachment of Bill Clinton did not think it was overturning the will of the people. Apparently, this impeachment provision only overturns the will of the people if it's a Republican president. I would like to give them more credit than that. What is the distinction here is the seriousness of the conduct. This remedy was put in the Constitution for a reason. It's not an unconstitutional remedy. It is part of the Constitution. The only way you can conceive of this remedy as being unconstitutional is if you believe, as the president does, that he is the state, that anything that opposes him opposes the state, is by definition anti-constitutional. But that, of course, is nonsense. But it is more than nonsense. It is dangerous nonsense. Madam Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentlewoman from Washington, Ms. Schreier, for 1 minute.
Gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, the people of Washington's 8th District sent me to Congress to fight for their families and make thoughtful, evidence-based decisions. I did not come to Congress to impeach a president, but evidence is evidence. And a balance of powers is fundamental to our democracy. On my first day in office, like everybody else here, I took an oath to uphold the Constitution and protect our country. History will judge this moment. Given all the facts before us, impeachment is the only remedy. I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm sure it did strike a chord with the chairman since, he showed up a little late, hadn't heard all the arguments. We beat the facts back all the time. It is the majority side that had to run through this. That clock and that calendar are killing him, and it's killing him because his arguments are falling flat. And to speak of evidence, yeah, we looked at the evidence. The evidence doesn't fit anything. And by the way, if he had extortion, put it in articles. He can't because he can't make the case. He can only put it in his notes and then come to the mic when he can't be questioned and talk about it. That's the problem, and that's the chord that's been struck. With that, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from North Dakota, Mr. Armstrong.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Once President Trump was sworn in, articles of impeachment were introduced almost immediately. In 3 years, House Democrats have introduced 10 resolutions, gaining support of over 100 of their members, and all of that before a July 25th phone call. But also during that time, the Russia conspiracy hoax was exposed. Obstruction of justice charges were abandoned after the Mueller hearings fell flat. So after 2 years, 19 lawyers, 40 agents, 2,800 subpoenas, 500 warrants, and 17 lies in a FISA warrant application, they had nothing to show for it. Undeterred by the facts and uninterested in governing, the beat marched on. So here we are today. We have no quid pro quo, no bribery, no extortion, no crimes alleged in the articles at all. But don't worry, because we have a brand new 632-page report alleging all kinds of things, some for the very first time. This isn't a somber, solemn process. This is a political drive-by. They just want President Trump gone. But this never-ending march towards overturning the 2016 election has consequences, because you're telling 63 million voters that their votes that you don't respect their vote. Voters in states like mine, who not that long ago used to send Democrats to this august chamber, but recently have found no home in the Democratic Party, who feel that their values have been replaced by a liberal elitist agenda, who feel that partisan points are more important than practical solutions. Your never-ending impeachment quest is a constant reminder to them that you don't trust their judgment, you don't understand their way of life, and you couldn't care less about the issues that are important to them. As Chairman Nadler has so ominously stated, if you're serious about removing a president from office, what you're really doing is overturning the results of the last election. Well, they were serious. They spent the last 3 years talking about it, unwilling to accept the results of 2016. I wonder if my colleagues recognize the irony that their impeachment vendetta is the greatest election interference of all. And it was homegrown right here in the halls of Congress. And with that, I yield
Members
back.
are reminded to address their remarks to the chair. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, we reserve the balance for time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Zeldin.
The gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
This impeachment is an embarrassment for House Democrats. On the substance, Dems claim that their case is uncontested.
relying on presumptions, hearsay, and 3% of the story, trying to connect dots that aren't actually connected. Some inconvenient truths. President Zelensky didn't know that there was a hold on aid until August 29th. The aid gets released shortly thereafter, and Ukraine didn't have to do anything in order to get that aid released. Now, President Zelensky says no demand, no quid pro quo, no pressure. But Democrats want the public to ignore the other 97% of the story. See, it doesn't work like that. Senate Democrats want new witnesses to show why there was a hold on aid. Odd request if you think you've already proven your case. Now, at the heart of this debate, two investigations are being discussed between countries. Democrats and media allies want the public to believe it's all just debunked that Ukrainians interfered in the 2016 election. They want you to ignore Avakov and Charlie's comments that Chalupa worked with the Ukrainian embassy, origins of the Steele dossier, the Black Ledger, and more. The problem with all of this is that the American public are smarter than Democrats are giving them credit for. Next, the Democrats claim Republicans are arguing that it was Ukraine and not Russia that wanted to interfere and was interfering in the 2016 election. No, that is not what Republicans are saying. And of course, we have the Burisma-Biden issue of a corrupt Ukrainian energy company run by a corrupt Ukrainian oligarch hiring Hunter Biden at least $50,000 per month with no energy experience and no Ukraine experience solely because he is VP Biden's son. Now, the company wanted to hire Hunter Biden because they wanted to curry favor. There was this ongoing corruption investigation. Enter Joe Biden. He gets that prosecutor fired, threatening the loss of $1 billion if it didn't happen immediately, which it was. Now, Democrats believe Burisma and Biden should be immune from scrutiny. I disagree. Never again should that conflict of interest ever happen. And our governments should be working together to get to the bottom of all of this. This has also been a total disaster on the process, from getting a federal worker to file a whistleblower complaint to Schiff's version made up of the July 25th call. In closed-door interviews, Schiff was prosecutor, judge, jury, and witness coach. Every day, he loved getting America drunk on his favorite cocktail, 3 ingredients: cherry-picking leaks, withholding key facts, and misstating evidence. In the depositions and in the public hearings, the President Counsel was not invited to attend, present evidence, or cross-examine witnesses, and Republicans weren't allowed to call witnesses like Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, and many others. Then there was the House Judiciary debacle, where Schiff couldn't even show up to present his reports. He had to have one of his staffers present it for him. This impeachment is ripping our country in half. It's fatally flawed on the process, the substance, the intentions, and the consequences.
Gentleman's time to
It's a total shift show. I encourage all my colleagues to vote
Gentleman
no.
from California.
I thank the Speaker. We continue to reserve the balance of our
Gentleman
time.
reserves. Gentleman from Georgia.
Agree.
Madam Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, today, as we sit here debating impeachment, you know, they all want to talk about it's the Constitution. It's Alexander Hamilton. You know, the last 30 days, I've heard more about Hamilton from my Democrat colleagues. And until then, the closest they ever came to Hamilton was a $10 bill. I mean, you know, all of a sudden what we have is these strict constitutionalists on the other side of the aisle. Listen, this has nothing to do with the Constitution. It has nothing to do with anything but raw politics. You know, there's only one person on the other side of the aisle that got 7 Pinocchios for not telling the truth. No one on this side of the aisle got that during this impeachment process, Madam Speaker. And the American people need to understand 2 key facts. The Democrats in control set their own rules of evidence. They said what we need to do for impeachment is to have compelling evidence and bipartisan support. Well, they don't have either of those 2 things. They failed the rules that they made up themselves. We've got President Zelensky of Ukraine saying there was no pressure. We've got the number 2 guy in Ukraine saying there was no pressure. We've got the number 3 guy in Ukraine, no pressure. These are the supposed victims of this alleged crime. And yet here we are supposedly having this compelling evidence and facts when the best witness they have, the very best witness they had to change his testimony twice. They mentioned him 611 times. And ultimately, he said, I presumed that that's what the president meant. You know, I can tell you that there are not facts here to support it, but what is more important than that, Madam Speaker, is this. Because here we are today, we have bipartisan opposition to impeachment, not bipartisan support. You know, my colleagues opposite want the American people to think that this is a sad and somber day. Well, this is a sad day. It's a sad day for this institution because we've lowered the bar to impeach a president that continues to give us an economy that not only is growing, but growing at levels that we have never seen in the history of our country. When we look at unemployment at a level that is truly remarkable, they want to impeach. But it's another sad day because now what they're doing is they're telling the American people that 233 Democrats deserve to decide who the president of the United States should be and disenfranchise 63 million voters. When all is said and done, when the history of this impeachment is written, it will be said that my Washington Democrat friends couldn't bring themselves to work with Donald Trump, so they consoled themselves instead by silencing the will of those who did, the American people. And I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman, for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Robert Mueller lays out facts from 2017 that constitute obstruction of justice, but says the president cannot be indicted. Only Congress can apply the law to those facts. Many of us have been talking about impeachment since those facts emerged in 2017. Of course, today we focus on more recent crimes. So why did we talk of impeachment back when a Republican-led Congress would not act? Why do we impeach today when a Republican-led Senate is unlikely to act? First, because it is our constitutional duty, no matter what the political consequences. Second, because it is the most effective tool to chasten and restrain a president who is not naturally feel constrained by the rule of law. I would note that the president's attempt to extort Ukraine was secretive and furtive, far different from his modus operandi of blazing threats that we saw in 2017. We can only imagine what high crimes and misdemeanors this president would have boldly committed had no one been talking about impeachment then, had he felt immune from impeachment. Today we will demonstrate that the president is not above the law.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It would have been nice if they had actually thought those crimes were bad enough to put in the articles. They didn't. I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Ratcliffe.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Madam Speaker, do you know who doesn't think the Democrats have presented enough testimony or evidence to impeach President Trump today? It's the Democrats. Sure, here in the House, Democrats running this inquiry have declared they've done everything needed. They have all the testimony and evidence necessary to impeach right now. But right now, down the hall, Democrats in the Senate are saying the exact opposite. They're complaining. They need more evidence and more testimony because Senate Democrats know that House Democrats have built them a house of cards impeachment. An impeachment built by the same Democrats who told America, trust us, President Trump committed treason. He's a Russian agent, and we've got evidence, which of course proved to be totally false. And to quote the favorite catchphrase of one member of this House, they got caught. Along the way, those same Democrats said, trust us. The FISA law and court weren't abused by the Obama administration using Democratic opposition research dossier against the Trump campaign and President Trump. Again, totally false, and again, they got caught. And when Democrats started this latest impeachment inquiry, they said, trust us. We have not yet spoken to the whistleblower. Again, totally false, and they got caught. Sadly, my Democratic colleagues have placed their own credibility in the hands of members of this body that have no credibility left, members that nobody trusts because they keep getting caught betraying America. But unless a bolt of courage and integrity strikes that side of the room in the next hour, history will reflect that Donald Trump is the third president to be impeached. History may also shortly reflect that he'll be the first president to be reelected after being wrongfully impeached. And if that happens, Democrats won't be able to hide behind a pretend veneer of caring about the Constitution. History will record the Democrats' legacy as a betrayal of the Constitution, because the founders meant for impeachment to be used for actions so extraordinary, so rare that it's happened 3 times in 2.5 centuries. It wasn't meant for congratulatory phone calls where there's no crime alleged, where there's no victim, and where the Democrats themselves couldn't even decide what to accuse the president of doing wrong before ending up with this embarrassment of a grab bag of abuse of power article. An obstruction of Congress, to even allege it, is an admission of constitutional illiteracy. The founders had a term for what the Democrats call obstruction of Congress. The founders called it the separation of powers. And the funny thing about obstruction, every time Democrats get caught trying to frame this president for some crime he didn't commit, they follow up by accusing him of obstructing their efforts to frame him for the things he never did in the first place. The founders warned and feared today might come when impeachment was used politically by the party that had the most votes. Today, Democrats are the founders' worst nightmare come true. I think most Americans are probably wishing they could impeach the Democrats. To them, I say, you can next November. I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I think when the history of this time is written, it will record that when my colleagues found that they lacked the courage to stand up to this unethical president, they consoled themselves by attacking those who did. I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Takano, for a unanimous consent request.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my remarks supporting the impeachment of President Donald Trump.
That objection is so ordered.
Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent for the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Clark, for her request.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my remarks supporting my vote for the impeachment of Donald J. Trump.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Napolitano, for unanimous consent request.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my remarks supporting the articles of impeachment against Donald Trump.
Without objection, so ordered.
Madam Speaker, the gentlelady from Ohio, Ms. Beatty, for unanimous consent request.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my remarks supporting the impeachment of President Donald Trump.
Without objection, so ordered.
Speaker, I recognize the gentlelady from Virginia, Ms. Wexton, for a unanimous consent request.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record my remarks supporting the impeachment of President Donald Trump.
That objection is so ordered.
Madam Speaker, I'm now proud to recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pascrell, for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, we're here today because of the failure of so many to cast aside narrow ambition to confront the threat standing before us. Offered the chance to investigate this government together, the president and his party stonewalled and obstructed. We're here today because they choose comfort over courage and avarice over the republic. This is the ongoing tragedy of our age, and it is ongoing. The matter is now solely in our hands and belongs to us and us alone. The buck has stopped. Many have invoked the judgment of history as an antidote to this threat. But the threat to democracy is here today, not tomorrow. We need not, we must not await the verdict of time for Donald Trump's abuse of power and obstruction. We can offer that verdict right now, and we are.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. Madam Speaker, the Democrats forgot 2 key things. They forgot about the facts and they forgot about fairness. 4 facts will never change. We have the call transcript, no quid pro quo. We have the 2 guys on the call, excuse me, who've repeatedly said there was no pressure, there was no pushing. We have the fact Ukraine didn't know aid was held up at the time of the phone call. And most importantly, Ukraine took no action, no announcement of investigation to get the aid released. But Democrats don't care. They don't care about the facts, and they sure don't care about the process. No subpoena power for Republicans, no Republican witnesses. During the depositions, Republicans were prevented from getting all their questions answered, but Democrats got every one of their questions. The witness responded to every one of theirs, but not Republicans. The chairman wouldn't let him. And of course, the whistleblower, the anonymous whistleblower with no firsthand knowledge, bias against the president, who worked for Joe Biden, was never compelled to testify. The guy who started it all. This is really about the president's been driving these guys crazy because he's getting things done. He's doing what he said he was going to do. He's having results. Taxes have been cut, regulations reduced, unemployment at its lowest level in 50 years, the economy growing, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh on the court, out of the Iran deal, embassy in Jerusalem, hostages home from North Korea, and a new NAFTA agreement coming tomorrow. But guess what? When you drain the swamp fights back. And they started attacking the president before the election even. July 31st, 2016, they opened the Russia investigation. The FBI spied on 4 American citizens associated with the Trump campaign. The FBI took the dossier to the FISA court, the dossier they already knew was false. They took it to the court, and they lied to the court 17 times. Guess what? 3 days ago on national television, even Jim Comey had to admit the FBI was wrong. And yesterday, 1 day ago, the FISA court sends the FBI a letter and says, straighten up, get your act together when it comes to the FISA application process. Think about this. Think about this. The attack started then, and they've continued right up till today. But I want you to think about something. The individual who said the FISA process was fine, the dossier was fine, the Russian investigation was fine, that same individual ran the impeachment process. That same individual's staff met with the whistleblower. That same individual is the only guy in Congress who knows who the whistleblower is for sure. And that same individual released the phone records of the president's personal attorney, released the phone records of a member of the press, and released the phone records of a Republican member of the United States Congress. This process has been unfair, it's been dangerous, and it has been harmful to our country. Democrats have never accepted the will of the American people. Nancy Pelosi made that clear 4 weeks ago when she called the President of the United States an imposter. The will of we, the people, the 63 million folks who voted for this guy and made him president in an electoral college landslide. They've never accepted that fact. We are less than 11 months away from the election. Let the American people decide who should be president. Let the American people decide. I yield back.
Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Schneider, for 1 minute.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise to defend the Constitution and support these articles of impeachment. The President abused the power of his office by corruptly putting his own political interests ahead of our nation's security. He blocked congressionally authorized military aid to coerce Ukraine to launch a phony investigation into his political rival. In the months since, he has waged a campaign of absolute obstruction against Congress's constitutional authority, ordering all federal officials to defy subpoenas and refusing to produce even a single document. Madam Speaker, I take no joy in today's impeachment vote or that the President's actions demand this response. This is a sad moment for our nation. Only twice before has the House voted to impeach a president, and never before on accusations of compromising our nation's security. I hope in the Senate, prosecution and defense can call and cross-examine witnesses, and the senators will hear the evidence and make their decisions without prejudice or prejudgment. This is a solemn moment, but our system of checks and balances was designed for times like these, and I have faith that our Constitution will guide us on the path ahead. I yield back.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Nunes.
Gentleman's recognized for
Thank
3
you, gentlemen.
minutes.
Madam Speaker, as the Democrats now admit, their attempt to remove the president began on Trump's inauguration day, when the Democrats' semi-official mouthpiece, the Washington Post, declared, "The campaign to impeach President Trump has begun." For years, the Democrats tried to expel the president with the preposterous accusation that he was a Russian agent. As detailed by IG Horowitz, dishonest intelligence officials used fake allegations spread by the Democrats to gain approval of a spying operation against the Trump campaign. As they falsely accused the Trump campaign of colluding with Russians, the Democrats themselves colluded with Russians to manufacture these allegations in the infamous Steele dossier. They even tried to get nude pictures of Trump from Russian pranksters. With the Russian collusion hoax, the Democrats had everything going for them. Federal investigations run by Trump haters, an endless supply of media cheerleaders, and a galaxy of left-wing interest groups amplifying their ridiculous message. And yet, even with all those weapons at their disposal, the Russia conspiracy theory collapsed. So they quickly concocted Plan B. The Ukraine hoax was based on a supposed whistleblower who colluded beforehand with the Democrats. The Democrats then prevented Congress from interviewing the whistleblower while conducting bizarre, secret depositions and selectively leaking testimony to discredited media hacks. The Democrats showcased the most useful witnesses in public hearings that somehow reduced support for impeachment. It's not easy to make a coup attempt boring, but the Democrats found a way. As it turns out, the American people don't think a routine phone call with a foreign leader is a good basis for ousting a U.S. president. The Democrats also put forth ever-changing accusations against the president, including campaign finance violations, quid pro quos, election interference, bribery, extortion. Eventually, they ended up with the ridiculous charges we consider today: abuse of power, an utterly meaningless term, and obstruction of Congress. One Democrat has pronounced the president guilty simply because he won't cooperate with their plan to railroad him. But the only thing President Trump is guilty of is beating Hillary Clinton. The Democrats refused to accept that loss, and now they're indicating they'll continue their impeachment efforts even after this one fails in the U.S. Senate. Madam Speaker, after all their deceit, phony investigations, ginned-up crises, and manufactured outrage, the Democrats need a long period of rehabilitation. They must learn how to do something productive for the American people instead of ripping the country apart in their lust for power. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I thank the gentleman for his remarks, and it's now my pleasure to recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Chairman Neal, for 3 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It is deeply unfortunate that we have to undertake this impeachment proceeding that unfolds this evening. But the part we play in this process is not optional. Among other things, as the Intelligence and Judiciary Committees have painstakingly documented, the President has indeed abused his authority, and he has indeed obstructed justice. He threatened to withhold congressionally appropriated U.S. taxpayer dollars from an ally under attack from Russia unless they agreed to interfere in our election on his behalf. He has expressed no remorse, and he continues to maintain that his behavior was, quote, perfect, while simultaneously obstructing legitimate congressional oversight and subpoenas and blocking members of his administration from providing truthful testimony to investigators. His actions are so far beyond the pale that they have left us with no remaining recourse except impeachment, and so we shall impeach. Because as drastic and as unwelcome as this step is, our country faces even greater long-term risk if we fail to respond. We cannot excuse a president who feels entitled to disregard or break the law with impunity. We are a nation built upon the rule of law, not the law of rulers. The framers gave us their best effort in 1787, and indeed it was an extraordinary one. The Constitution they set down wasn't perfect, but it founded a republic that has endured and thrived with exceptional stability. As the late Senator Moynihan pointed out, only 2 countries in the world both existed in 1800 and have never had their governments changed by violence since then, the United States and Britain. Only 8 governments have existed since 1914 and have not had their form of government changed by force since then. The United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, Sweden, and Switzerland. The innovative system of checks and balances that they constructed with the separation of powers brought about and successfully negotiated a generation of challenges that we have sustained. In the very first week that the framers began crafting this blueprint for America's freedom and stability, and negotiations indeed immediately started on impeachment. No government in the world at that time exposed the head of government to impeachment, but America was to be different. In the view of the framers, impeachment is in no way a constitutional crisis. It is a process that the framers wisely judged that we would sometimes need. This evening is one of those rare moments. Madison worried that one day the country would elect a president who, quote, might pervert his administration to a scheme of peculation or oppression. He might betray his trust to foreign powers, end of quote. George Mason asked the delegates, quote, shall we see any man to be above justice? And above all, shall that man be above it, then who can commit the most extensive injustice? End of quote. Of course not, because having just thrown off one king, they would never consent to anoint another one. America firmly rejected the notion of divine right. Speaker Rayburn summed it up, but I have 30 extra seconds, 30 extra seconds.
Without objection.
Thank the gentleman.
Gentleman's recognized.
Article 1 of the Constitution prescribes Congress as the first branch of government. And just as importantly, let me quote Speaker Rayburn, who was asked, how many presidents did you serve under? And Speaker Rayburn answered, none. I served with 7 presidents of the United States. Impeachment is reserved for moments of grave danger when the constitutional order becomes dangerously out of balance, moments like this one, and that's why I will vote to impeach.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield a minute 45 to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Ferguson.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute 45 seconds.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, here we are on the verge of doing exactly what America doesn't want us to do and what they feared that you would do. In 2016, I, along with 63 million American voters, representing 304 electoral college votes, went to the polls and we raised our collective political middle finger to D.C. and voted for Donald Trump. Folks like my father who watched this place destroy his profession of community banking. My friends and family in the textile industry that saw their way of life destroyed following NAFTA. Americans in rural areas whose opportunity in life and voice have been drowned out by the screams of socialist Democrats. Our friends and neighbors living in poverty and crime, broken down, project-based public housing, who for generations have been told by this place, this is the best that we think that you can do. Here's your check. God bless you. Now move along. Those voters. And now you want to remove our voice from office. Well, our voice will be heard, and I stand here determined to make sure that it will be, because we will fight back against this corrupt and unfair impeachment process. How dare you, the liberal elites, the condescending bureaucrats, and every other kind of swamp critter in this godforsaken place tell the American public who the president should be. That's the job of the American voter, not yours. This whole flipping goat rodeo is a sham and a shame, and it will not be forgotten. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from California.
Madam Speaker, I'm proud to recognize the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Heck, for 2 minutes.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, this week Americans are busy finishing up their Christmas shopping, mostly for their children, or if they're lucky enough to have them, their grandchildren. And high school and college students are taking final exams and sweating out the results. And that got me to thinking about those who follow and what our obligation is to them. And that got me thinking about those who came before and how they might have seen their obligation to us. People like my grandfather, whom our family believes literally was born on the boat on the way over here from Germany. Or my father, who fought in World War II against the very people that his grandfather had left. We are all here today, all of us, because someone before us sacrificed so that they could journey here and build a new life in this unique land. And we are here today because those immigrants and their children were dedicated not just to the land of America, but to the idea, freedom and opportunity secured by self-government, choosing our own leaders in free and fair elections, and the rule of law under the Constitution.
Gentleman's time's expired.
2 minutes?
Madam Speaker, happy to yield another 30 seconds to the gentleman from Washington.
Gentleman's recognized.
This idea of America is in peril, brought about so by this president who sought to cheat in an election. A president who puts himself above the law and attacks the bedrock constitutional precept of checks and balances. Yeah, the question is, can America survive this behavior? What idea will we hand down to those who follow us? And finally, what is our obligation to those who would follow? It is simply this: to do our duty, to defend the Constitution and the values underpinning it by voting yes on the articles of impeachment. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Georgia.
I reserve, Madam Chair.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from California.
Sure. Madam Speaker, I'm proud to yield to the gentlelady from Florida, Ms. Demings, for 2 minutes.
Gentlelady is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, we live in the greatest democracy in the world, and I am convinced that the overwhelming majority of Americans are good, decent people who work hard and play by the rules. But then we have people who have no respect for the law, people who have little regard for the rules, people who spend a lot of their time trying to figure out how to game the system. Law enforcement officers call them habitual offenders. And the more they get away with, the more likely they are to engage in misconduct. Some say it takes courage to hold powerful people accountable, but I see it differently. I see it as a sense of duty, a regular part of my job as a member of Congress. However, habitual offenders usually don't sneak up on you. They usually telegraph their intentions time and time again. On July 27th of 2016, in my home state of Florida, then candidate Trump said, "Russia, if you're listening, I hope you will be able to find the 30,000 emails, thereby inviting foreign interference into U.S. elections." But then the day after the special counsel testified before Congress, the president, feeling undeterred and emboldened, said, "Call President Zelensky," and pressured him to help him rig the elections, and chose to hold much-needed military aid over our allies' head until the president's demands were met. Now, I served 12 years on the hostage negotiations team, and I know that pressure and demands come in many forms. And in this scheme, we had both. I've enforced the laws, and now I write the laws. But the laws mean nothing if the accused can destroy evidence, stop witnesses from testifying, and blatantly refuse to cooperate. I ask you to name somebody in your community or your family who can do that. I know the president said that he can get away with anything he wants to. I come today to tell you that no, he cannot, because no one is above the law, and he shall be held accountable.
Gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this moment, I yield for a unanimous consent request. The gentleman from Arkansas.
Gentleman's recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to enter my remarks into the record in opposition to this sham impeachment.
Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I yield 4 minutes to the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney.
Gentlelady is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Collins. And Madam Speaker, I rise today on the floor of this magnificent chamber, the very heart of our democratic republic. And I would imagine, Madam Speaker, that every one of us in this chamber, regardless of party, understands, shares a common view that being citizens of this great republic is among life's most tremendous blessings. We all know that no force on earth is more powerful than the force of freedom. It is our miraculous constitutional system, Madam Speaker, defended by our men and women in uniform, that has safeguarded that freedom for 230 years. Each one of us in this chamber bears a sacred duty, passed down to us through generations and affirmed in our oath of office, to preserve and protect our Constitution. Madam Speaker, our nation's framers recognized that this republic is fragile, and that extreme partisanship can be among the most severe threats to its survival. That is why in Federalist 65, Alexander Hamilton wrote, quote, "There will always be the greatest danger that the impeachment decision will be regulated more by the comparative strength of parties than by real demonstrations of innocence or guilt." Here, Madam Speaker, our Democratic colleagues have been working to remove this president since the day he was elected, searching for an offense on which they could impeach. Failing to find one, Madam Speaker, they have decided to